Jane Doe burst into the police station, her appearance wild and unkempt, gripping the officer's attention instantly. With a voice both frantic and compelling, she claimed an experience so bizarre, it bordered on the unbelievable and abduction by beings not of this world. Detailed recounting of her ordeal was both chilling and fantastical, leaving the officers torn between skepticism and fascination as they began to document her story, half expecting it to unravel as the delusions of a troubled mind. However, when they checked her phone as part of a routine procedure, they found something that sent chills down their spines. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The unnamed woman was walking into the mountains with full conviction that she was about to meet her destiny. The message she had received on her phone was clear, not from this world, and that was about to be proven to her. Her whole life she wanted to meet extraterrestrial life, and today was the day. Far away from society and any prying eyes, she waited and looked up into the sky for hours, never losing her faith. At the end, eventually, she was rewarded for her patience. Lights started to flare up in the sky. She got closer and closer and closer until she could see a large vessel coming in her direction. It eventually came to a stop right above her. She closed her eyes and spread her arms, and before she knew it, she was no longer on Earth. She was with our counterparts from outer space, but she was not welcomed as a guest. Anything but, in fact. Was the woman experienced more like a kidnapping, and the aliens were not planning on keeping her for long? They did some unspeakable things to her on that spacecraft, and while the thought that she would never see home again, it was actually over before she knew it. She went to sleep on the UFO and then woke up again on Earth, in the same forest she left. She did not know how she made it back, but what she did know was that the world needed to hear about this. Her story needed to be told, but who was going to believe her? Her first instinct was to go to the police with this information. It was an early Monday morning when Officer Grayson pulled up at the police station. As soon as he sat behind his desk, one of Officer Grayson's colleagues, Officer Walden, burst through his door. "Officer Grayson, you're going to want to see this," he simply said. When they arrived at the interrogation room, Officer Walden paused before entering. "Before we enter, let me brief you on what you're about to hear this morning." A lady walked into the station telling a bizarre story. Officer Grayson listened as his colleague told him about the strange lady. "You can let me speak to her," he eventually said. Officer Grayson sat down in front of her and cleared his throat. "Good morning. My name is Officer Grayson, and I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" Officer Grayson tried to talk to her a few more times, but the lady seemed to be in a state of shock. After trying for a good 15 minutes, Officer Grayson sighed and stood up. "I've been abducted by aliens," she whispered with a serious face. "You were what?" he asked confusedly. The lady kept staring into his eyes and repeated herself. "I've been gone for a long time, abducted by aliens. I was walking outside when everything suddenly turned black and then white as I was in a hospital. But it was an alien hospital." Officer Grayson listened carefully, but he had to admit that it was hard not to laugh. After the lady finished telling her bizarre story, Officer Grayson had to pause for a minute not to burst out laughing. "You must believe me," the lady suddenly said with a sense of urgency. "They're coming all right? Well, we'll take your statement and see what we can do." Officer Grayson stood up and walked outside. Once outside, Officer Grayson immediately began to laugh. Her story was just too strange to believe, but he had a feeling she wouldn't let it rest until they took her seriously. So he ordered Officer Walden to take her statement and act as if they treated her case just like any other case. Officer Walden agreed and went into the interrogation room to take the lady's statement. Officer Grayson went back to his office and expected Officer Walden to walk into his office with a big smile on his face as soon as he was done, but it didn't go as he had expected. As soon as Officer Walden walked through the door, Officer Grayson knew something had changed about him. "We found something strange about the Jane Doe case," he said with an uncertain voice. "We found information on her phone that was, well, unexpected, to say the least." Officer Walden walked over to Officer Grayson's desk and handed him a phone. "Take a look at these texts and tell me what you think." Officer Grayson took the phone in his hand, but he had no idea what he was looking at. He frowned and asked Officer Walden what the texts meant and in which language they were written, but his answer was shocking. "We have no idea what the texts say, as it isn't written in a language known here on Earth." Officer Grayson paused. "What are you trying to tell me? I know it sounds crazy, but you have to admit that these text messages look almost otherworldly." Officer Grayson couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Do you even hear yourself talking?" And he asked his colleague irritably, "Do you really want to tell me you believe these unbelievable stories about alien abduction?" At that moment, Officer Grayson knew he had to be the one to take over the case. Officer Walden's judgment was impaired. He already ordered him to hand over all the information he had gathered and sent him back to his desk. Officer Grayson then flipped open Jane Doe's binder and began to read. Because of the strange message, Officer Grayson knew the case was a bit more serious than he had thought at first. So Officer Gray the Abduction, Avec Regere Mon Lololi in the station's database. He knew he had to pass the phone on to digital forensics, who would hopefully be able to decipher the texts and figure out who sent them. Determined to decode it, he called in the station's digital forensics team, hoping their expertise would shed light on the enigma. They ran it through various decryption algorithms, hoping to find a coherent pattern. Hours turned into days, but the message resisted every attempt at interpretation. "It's like nothing we've ever seen," one expert remarked, frustration evident in his voice. Characters didn't fit any known language or coding system. After exhausting all technical avenues, a junior member of the team offered a different perspective. "What if it's just gibberish?" he suggested. Dr. Mitchell was confused. This was not supposed to happen, but it became worse. Jane Doe started whispering gibberish, and while her voice was getting louder and louder, she started to say seemingly random numbers. This went on for at least 3 minutes when Dr. Mitchell finally had an idea of what was happening, and that there was actually a massive breakthrough at this moment. While this whole moment seemed so random, Dr. Mitchell recognized there was something more to it. She started writing down the numbers Jane Doe was yelling. Exactly every 10 seconds she said another number, and soon it turned out there was a pattern. So he quickly went to Dr. Mitchell to retrieve the numbers. He and a colleague would start decoding straight away, but it turned out the puzzle was way easier to solve than they thought it would. Luckily, it only took the experienced cops a mere minute to figure out the numbers Jane Doe was saying were forming a telephone number. So without hesitation, Officer Grayson picked up his phone and started entering the number. But just as he wanted to press call, Officer Grayson's phone rang with the number they had decoded. It was a young voice, and it was definitely not what Officer Grayson had expected. "I've been searching everywhere for my sister," the caller began, her voice quivering. As she described her sister, Officer Grayson's heart raced. It was unmistakably Jane Doe. But how did all of this link to an alien abduction? And what about Jane Doe's strange behavior and blackout in therapy? The caller, identifying herself as Emily, Jane Doe's younger sister, began recounting their family's painful journey. Jane had been diagnosed with a severe mental disorder, and after a particularly harrowing episode, the family made the difficult decision to admit her to a specialized facility. But one day, Jane disappeared, leaving no trace. Emily's voice cracked as she revealed the depth of their family's anguish during her absence. The pieces of the puzzle finally fell into place. Officer Grayson, armed with this new information. Jane seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. After much deliberation, it was decided to return to the facility. The facility, a serene haven surrounded by lush greenery, welcomed Jane Doe with open arms. The staff, familiar with their histories, were well equipped to aid in their recovery. With the support of dedicated professionals and the love of Jane's family, Jane embarked on a journey of healing, hope, and rediscovery, and the story culminates with Jane Doe moving into a cozy apartment. She found a job, built new relationships, and became active members of their community.